All right, so Dom, did you see the season premiere of SNL?
Oh yeah, Jenna. I saw a few clips online and I gotta say, I
That's where most of us
loved,
watched it.
yeah, I loved their cold open, where James Austin Johnson, he's playing Trump, and I love his like saying, Daddy's watching.
Okay, first of all, I feel so bad, but like, because there's been a rotating cast of characters who play Donald Trump. So thank you for letting me know who was the comedian who was seriously, because I didn't know. But yeah, that Daddy's watching thing, that was kind of creepy. Do you think Daddy's
Oh,
watching us now, like on YouTube right
I
now?
I think someone's definitely watching.
Well, I should definitely hope so. My God, put enough time and effort into this, but maybe not from the administration. But yeah, we definitely hope somebody's watching.
Yes. Comics though, they really they're going through a really tough time right now with how the climate is.
Oh, completely. But then again, so are journalists. I mean,
Hmm.
it just different jobs, but somehow the same heat. So it's risky to make a joke and report on a fact.
Oh, so true. All right, Jenna, let's start the show now.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Dom. You know what's funny? Not long ago, we were both breaking news. Now we're
Breaking unemployment records.
exactly just like thousands of other journalists who've been laid off from newsrooms across the country.
Yeah, and after the shock wore off, we kept asking ourselves, what the hell do we do now?
And over many, many cups of coffee,
And maybe a few drinks.
we realized we had a unique opportunity here. Why not pull back the curtain on what's really happening in American media?
Right? I mean, we've spent years in this industry seeing how stories get made or don't, and now we can actually talk about it.
And trust me, there's a lot to talk about. From local news disappearing to social media reshaping journalism, we'll break it all down.
And look, we're not here to lecture anybody. We just want to help make sense of the information that we're getting and maybe have some much needed fun along the way.
So whether you're glued to the news, just trying to figure out what's real in your feed, or curious about the future of media, come hang with us.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking, a podcast where two journalists
Are taking a critical look at American media. So the comedy world's been taking some hits this year, Jenna.
Yeah, hits is a nice way to say it. I mean, we watched Jimmy Kimmel get pulled off the air and then reinstated a few days later. And now we, of course, have the fallout from the Riyadh Comedy Festival. But what I find so interesting is that both instances speak not only to free speech, but also trust.
So true. It's like, journalism's been under fire for a while, between like political blowback, of course, shrinking newsrooms, which we've been talking about,
Hmm.
and also audiences like losing trust in us and or losing trust in journalism. And so free speech is feeling a lot less free right now.
I don't know what's going on, no, I can't tell what's right or wrong, so I just write my little songs and hope it all works out. And if you say you know what's going on, I'll say okay, and smile and nod and watch the nonsense confidently falling from your mouth. See, once upon a time we had respectable journalists reporting on facts. Then the networks got purchased by the worst people on earth and converted to fear machines. Don't even get me started on social media.
Okay, so if that voice sounds familiar, that was comedian Paul Saylor. You probably heard him, a clip of him, I would say, on our earlier episode, What Counts as a Journalist Today?
And you found them on TikTok, right?
Yeah, that's where I find
Mm.
most stuff now.
We all always, I
I
know.
know. But what hit me so hard about his song is how much it captures what it feels like when we look at the news landscape right now. And I'm saying that as a journalist. Like,
Mhm.
so we wanted to have a longer conversation with Paul about public trust, free speech, and why sometimes you at this point have to laugh, otherwise you'd cry your eyes out over the state of affairs. So
Yes.
Paul's part of our Press Pass series of bonus conversations. So first of all, Paul, welcome to the show.
I'm very excited to be here, Jenna. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on actually because again, like you never know sometimes on social media where you see something and you're just like, that was really cool. I wonder if that person would talk to us.
And it's either going to be that or something like that was really horrifying. How did this get into my algorithm? So I'm like, I'm really glad we're living in this corner of it where it's, oh wow, like-minded people connecting about things that matter to us. That's like social media, not only for evil anymore. This is exciting for me.
That not only for evil. Okay, so with I obviously I connected with that song. I was just like uh, the fact that I am a working journalist and I connected so deeply to that is both inspiring and disturbing. So I'm wondering for you, like it feels like it's almost, sort of like an anthem for this moment of information overload where not only are we getting different information about the same subject from so many different sources, but that it's getting harder and harder to distinguish spin from opinion from just truth.
Yeah. And it that feeling of overwhelm, I think is kind of at the heart of it. I think a lot of times when you get stuck in a creative process, I think one of the most useful things you can do is just try to write or create from whatever the honest thing is that you're feeling right now. And I think for me, the honest thing that I feel most of the time when I'm sitting down trying to think like, how can I have a take or an opinion about this is I have no idea what the F I'm talking about. Can we use potty words?
Oh
I probably should have
yeah.
asked
Yeah.
that before.
Oh, yes.
Thank goodness. Okay, so I have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about most of the time. And it really sometimes does inspire like a panic in me. I think, even something as simple as somebody asks you on a typical day, how you doing? If I literally limit it to my day-to-day scope of experience, I'm really doing well. I have beautiful relationships and friendships. I'm well fed. I have a roof over my head. The second I zoom out to a global scale, there's this just like nervous system overload of everything feels insane. I have no idea how bad it is, but I know it's bad. And I think that the song just kind of came out of this feeling of real helplessness. And that, the only thing I feel like I can really say with any degree of confidence is that I have no idea what I'm talking about.
I mean, if it helps, most journalists don't until we start making phone calls and talking to people.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I really respect and admire about journalism, to the extent that I understand it, which, is largely shaped by media representations, but good media representations. I'm a big fan of the newsroom. I'm a fan, like, I have great admiration for the humility and the skepticism of it seems like there's a real responsibility and kind of tantamount to what journalism is in making sure that you've really vetted your information. Whereas in comedy, it's kind of like just get something into your head and start talking about it. And if people laugh, then run with it forever. Even if new information comes out, who cares? This is your thing now.
But you know what, Paul, like what fascinated me about the song was the fact that you really, I get the sense that you kind of see the problem that's going on in journalism. Like you talk about, I mean, you talk about the worst people on earth who basically have taken over and turning into fear machine. And you talk about, you also get into AI, like you mentioned AI, like about, I mean, how important it is for you to sort of bring those kind of real issues into the comedy that you're doing too? I mean, in this particular situation, like what was important for you? What did you really want people to sort of take away from the song?
Well, interestingly, I when I wrote it, I didn't really have any of that sort of agenda, and I think part of its effectiveness comes from that. I think where I personally, and I think a lot of artists and creatives can relate, when you go into it with the mindset of I've got something to say, I want to be the change I'm going to see in the world,
Hmm.
that's where I can tend to get stuck because you start to think in terms of what's going to make this message palatable. But when it just comes from here's just a thing that I'm feeling that I'm going to try to express as clearly as I can, that is kind of personal to me, and that I think the fact that people relate to it on that level uh, is kind of a surprising and wonderful afterthought. As far as what's important to me about it, I do think that just this general idea that media is not focused on giving you accurate information. And I think I'm really kind of one of the last vestiges of a generation where I was like taught that in school. We were taught about media bias and taught about, even in this agonizing process of writing papers and having to do MLA citations and sort of beaten into our heads like you need to check where your information is coming from. And I feel really lucky that I had that. because, you know, as you said, now it can be really hard to tell the difference between real
Mhm.
information and just somebody's opinion. Even in news media, you know, very often you're seeing people making really sweeping proclamatory statements about really important issues, and you're not seeing citations. You're not seeing, you know, where they're getting this data from. There's a lot of, you know, I always say there's sort of the rhetorical kind of triggers you can hear of, you know, everyone is saying this, and you know, everybody knows. It's like, no,
Gotta
no,
love
no.
that round table.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows anything. And not only that, but this idea that if everybody assumes a thing to be true, therefore it's true. In my experience, if everybody assumes a thing to be true, that's compelling evidence that it's total bullshit.
I was gonna say we
Like,
all thought the world was flat at one point.
yes, yes, we did, and a shocking number of us still do.
Mhm.
That is kind of the case in point for me. Like, I don't know what to make of that. Is this like a tens of thousands of people just trolling the world? Or is there this real dedicated corner of ignorance? Because I could believe it either way.
Well, that is, and that's something that we want to explore as we also go further because with this podcast, because there has become this tendency of, because we want to respect all points of view, that you could have a roundtable that involves like, an actual scientist, and a flat earther, and the subject is, was Copernicus right or not? And like, this is not debatable.
And yeah, so I actually, one of my sort of nerdy little corners of the algorithm is I love watching debate. I love rhetoric. I love how it connects to comedy and storytelling. And it is always fascinating because inevitably you'll see these debates where you've got one person who clearly knows everything there is to know about the topic and one person who's really good at making it sound like they do.
Mhm.
And this sort of skill of being able to speak in a way that suggests that you know what you're talking about while saying absolutely nothing at all of substance. Not to call anybody out, but Jordan Peterson is the absolute master of this. I'm going to say a lot of words that sound really intelligent and fast enough that you don't really have time to process what it is that I'm actually saying, which is about, you know, if you really look at the sort of general abstraction of the collective logos that would suggest, you're just saying words, bruh. You're just saying words. And there's, you know, it's fascinating to me how we see it in the political sphere, we see it in the comedy sphere, we see it in the, you know, kind of information media sphere. We are emotional beings, and the media that is successful capitalizes on that. And you know, as it relates to what we talked about with this sort of, you know, political polarization, the intensifying of misinformation as a result of corporate interests, the people with the money recognize that the way they make more money is stoking particular emotions. And so I really do, you know, the line about fear machines, I think you can really see, and it's not unique to either side of the political aisle. News media makes their money off fear. And the
Mhm.
more you can sort of feed into whatever people are already afraid of and say, yes, you are right to feel that way. You are smart. You are a warrior on the side of justice. The more you get the clicks, the more you get the engagement. And it really does. I wish I could sit here and say that I've cracked the solution to it, but you know, at the very least, we can all have a chuckle about how dismal it is.
Well, that's what's great about comedy, though, right? You're able to bring things to light that don't come across sometimes as being so. I mean, it depends. Like, you could say something so critical, yet we're all laughing with you. And in the back of our minds, we're like, oh, yeah, that's kind of true. Like, yeah, Fear Machine is like, that shit is, it hits. And I think that's what's so great about comedy. It makes it so powerful when you can just take really complex issues and kind of just relay it to us in a way, the public in a way that we can have a good time with it, but yet also afterwards think about it. I think about so often, of course, like other, let's say like Jon Stewart and John Oliver who do their shows and kind of obviously take it, they do more, they have researchers and they have people who work on their show, but still the point of their show is to kind of make us, look at the news that is being covered. I mean, and how can we connect with it in a very different way and kind of in many ways people trust comics more than they do the actual newscasters. I mean, there's a lot of people. Honestly, even I mean, I can speak for myself. I do too, because I think in the way that I feel like y'all don't have a like some of the other bigger medias, they have a like you said before, it's corporate America. It's about money. It's about fear mongering. And the comics are kind of like, look, let's cut to the shit. And I mean, how do you take it? Is there a responsibility, like when you're doing, whether it's your act and anything you're doing, Paul, like how important do you think it is for you to really research and kind of get shit right and not just like speak whatever, like I don't know what I'm talking about and I'm just going to say whatever I think.
Yeah, I think you've touched on something that I think is fascinatingly at the intersection of like integrity as an artist and just kind of like what it means to be effective in comedy. You know, I think at the heart of something that is effectively funny, there's either something kind of like profoundly sad and depressing, which I think is where that song comes in, or just something so absurd and silly. You know, it's like there's a man with an arrow through his head, the kind of Steve Martin slapsticky end
Hmm.
of things.
Hmm.
But when you get into the stuff that I think really affects people and gets people to think, it's giving you a release about something that is otherwise like otherwise you just have to scream into the abyss or curl into a fetal position and weep. I mean, and I think, you know, where shows like, you know, John Oliver, Jon Stewart, where they are so effective is that they're able to take this information that would otherwise just make you want to howl at the moon. And instead, we're able to laugh about it. We're able to find some release. And that sort of collective experience of release, I think, is what makes those shows so successful. And I do think it's worth saying comedians are still trying to make money. And it would
Hmm.
be, you know, it would be a bit naive to suggest that, you know, people like Jon Stewart and John Oliver are solely out here crusading for truth. But I do think anyone who has dedicated their life to comedy has a vested interest in a particular pursuit of truth. And that's kind of what makes comedy work. So as it relates to me, you know, I really try to resist thinking of myself as a pundit or you know a preacher for a lot. Like I'm here trying to make ha-has, but I think it's also irresponsible when comics pretend that that's not a thing. Like that, especially work that, you know, gains traction, that it's out there on the internet, that might not affect people, particularly comics with a platform. You see a lot of the podcast guys, you know, for Joe Rogan to kind of retroactively come out and be like, "What? I'm just a funny guy. Nobody's supposed to take me
Yeah.
seriously." And
Now
I
that
think
I've affected the
yeah,
entire election.
Yeah.
yeah, I think he's sincere in that. I think he really means it. But it's also like, bro, you should have thought of that before you started kind of platforming people and creating this environment where you're not really doing due diligence to say, hey, by the way, nothing this guy just said has been vetted or approved by any, you know, peer review process. But here he is, Dr. What's his name, and here's how you can cure cancer with bleach. Like
Yeah.
I'm just asking
it's
questions.
yeah, I'm just asking questions and I'm just being a fun guy. So yeah, and I think, you know, that the truth is kind of the litmus test for comedy. So for me, the vested interest in it coming from a place of truth is I want it to be funny. I want it to matter to people. And what's funny for me is always going to kind of be dictated by how honestly it resonates. And I think for me, you know, whether I'm workshopping with a crowd or even just writing on my own, when I get the sense of like, okay, this speaks to something real, that's when I know it's probably something funny. And I think, you know, this song I've gotten a lot of good response from, and I'm really happy with how many people have related to it. It was beyond my dreams that like actual journalists would get on board and find that exciting. It's right up there. I posted some trans comedy, and like lots and lots of trans people have been really supportive and excited by like, oh yeah, jokes about trans people that celebrate instead of insult trans people. Who knew? So yeah, I'm very excited to have kind of like created something that resonates on a frequency with journalists. But for me, it just came from this is what feels true to me, and that's why I think it's funny.
Well, I will say when it comes to that point of that release that you were talking about, because I think about like, and Dom, I'm sure you felt this too, like there's nothing quite like when a comedian constructs a joke that hits so hard
Hmm.
that you do that laugh where you literally laugh all the oxygen out of your lungs like I can't
Yeah.
breathe like that and it's funny but at the same time it's also so funny because my god somebody said it and like it there is this just cathartic release that I don't think I ever really thought about it that way before.
Oh, 100%. And you know, there's a bit that has never worked, but just accurately expresses how I feel, which is that as a comedian, we want to be the person who says what everyone is thinking. And that's
Mm.
really challenging right now because what everyone's thinking is basically like, just like, all the time. And so it's like, how do you take this just sort of blanket overwhelm of existential anxiety and panic and distill it down into like ba-da-ba, ba-da-ba, ba, like it's a challenge, but it's an exciting challenge. And I think it's, the comedians who are successful are the ones who embrace that challenge and lean in. And I think what is always really frustrating to me is seeing the opposite thing of, oh, well, in today's world, you can't say anything. The catchphrase of people with thousands upon thousands of people to whom they are platformed, saying whatever the heck they want.
It's like I think also it connects to me, and before when we were talking about like the Joe Rogans or for other comics who kind of say, well, hey guys, I was just, kidding around. I don't know. I think about even in cable news, you have sometimes so many people who are really commentators or their opinion people, yet they deliver news with such, this is fact. And then afterwards, it's kind of like, no,
Absolute certainty.
exactly. And the channels will say, no, 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 but that's our that's our opinion section. That's not really based off. Those are just opinions. So don't really pay attention to that. The rest of our network is fact-based, but it's like that ends up maybe being like 6 hours of the entire 24-hour cycle.
Exactly.
6 hours when everyone's watching, no less.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're gonna put somebody on prime time and then be like, well, don't listen to them. Like,
no,
we didn't.
They're just entertainment. They're there to make you. They're there to get you angry and get you pissed off and scared that you don't want it. That it's that kind of dopamine where it's just like you get hooked on being angry or scared or they're coming for me. But I think I'm sure for you too. Like even in the comedy world, I know like I've seen sort of that happen where talking about cultural issues, you see that happen with a lot of times. People say like, I can't be funny anymore. Like I'm not able to do this. Like the audience is a little bit
Too woke.
Too woke.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is a thing that has transcended every stage of my show business career. Nothing screams weak sauce like blaming your audience. Like, I see it in the theater when people are like, oh, these audiences today, they don't understand audience etiquette. It's like, audience etiquette is some shit that the bougie rich made up a couple of centuries ago to try to remove theater from what it was intended to be, which was a public communal art form. Shakespeare wrote for screaming drunks who were like betting on chicken fights and banging hookers in the back room, and then would come back and be like, what happened in Act Two? Like this. And funnily enough, when you watch Shakespeare with that understanding, it makes a lot more sense. That's why people come out every couple scenes and be like, here's a really, really flowery speech about what just happened so that you can catch up. And as it relates to comedy, again, the job of the comedian is to make people laugh. If they don't laugh, you didn't do your job. And that's okay. A huge part of developing as a comedian is you need that experience. You need to know what it's like to bomb. And nobody's material is going to work on everybody, but to say that because someone didn't laugh at you, that's a bad audience, their priorities are out of whack. And the too woke thing is particularly frustrating because anytime anyone is pressed on a definition of woke, it usually just comes down to like, I care about other people's feelings.
What? Okay, all right.
Like,
the etymology
yeah,
of that word just drives me crazy, considering where it started and where it is now. It just, oh my God. Okay, but kind of building on what you were talking about, here's one of the other things that I always find really interesting in the comedy world right now, and that is this juxtaposition of punching up or punching down, and that seems to have also become intentionally or not a controversial thing, if that makes any sense, because we're seeing more instances. I mean, you were talking about, like being able to make jokes for trans people that actually they could feel celebrated, whereas there had been this, or there still is a movement of just like, no, I should be able to make fun of these people.
Well, and fascinatingly, this thing you described of punching up versus punching down, what the comics on the sort of anti-woke end of things have done with Machiavellian brilliance is somehow create a narrative in which by persecuting trans people, they are punching up. Because there's this liberal mob of controlling interests that's trying to suppress dissenting speech, and that really the straight white men who just want to tell it like it is are the ones being oppressed. And,
Mhm.
I think you see that on a political scale, but the comedy microcosm is fascinating because, they're saying, no, I'm not punching down. I'm defending women from the encroachment of trans women in their bathroom spaces. I'm protecting women's sports, which I definitely cared about before 5 years ago. Like,
I was all about Title
I,
IX, man.
oh
And
man, every Saturday when me and my dad would sit down to watch women's Division II swimming, and now all those memories are ruined by this encroaching enemy. And I really do think that the sort of the co-opting of persecution is one of the most fascinating phenomena. And I think the information ecosystem in which it's happening is a huge part of it. Like, you can find opinion commentary and even stuff that sounds an awful lot like scientific information to back up this idea that, yeah, the LGBT mafia is coming to
Yeah.
shut down free speech.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the other side is literally threatening legislative and litigation action against free speech.
I mean,
And somehow it all works out because we are easily manipulated apes with volatile emotional brains. What are you going to do? Laugh or cry?
well, I would definitely agree with that part. Well, so I'm also, would you say that people's hunger for getting information from, or their news, if you will, more from comedians or trusting comedians more, is not only the fact that you guys are able to communicate in a more honest way? Like, again, journalism, at least traditionally, has always upheld the oh God, why do I always blank on this word, Dom? I always do
What?
this, and it's not nonpartisan. It's not nonprofit. We're supposed to be.
Objective?
There we go.
There we
Thank
go.
you. I don't.
Thank you.
I
It's
think the
okay.
fact that that word does
I,
not stick in my brain is actually indicative of the whole problem right there.
that's where we're at, man. I can't even think the word objective.
Thanks for that,
Exactly.
Paul.
But
Thanks for that.
because that we're supposed to do that, it like listen, all people have thoughts and feelings and points of view, but because we're supposed to be setting that aside, I'm now really starting to wonder, is that one of the things that makes people think that we're untrustworthy? That just like, no, what?
Well, first of all, yes. And I think there is a particular campaign, particularly on certain sides of the media ecosphere, where the whole idea of like, academic due diligence and intellectual rigor are sort of, again, painted as an encroaching enemy. It's not you're a scientifically minded person who wants to vet their information and make sure it's accurate. It's the intellectual elites think they know better than everybody else, and we're just using good old fashioned common sense. Which again, what I think there may be no toxically misleading phrase than common sense, because the least common type of sense is good sense, and the most common type of sense is nonsense. Like, where do we get this idea that like there's anything useful or interesting that people just know? And as you know, in terms of why people gravitate toward comedians, I do think that at the end of the day, what we observe over and over again is that people's choices, people's worldviews are shaped by their emotional experience more than anything else. And, it, it's unfortunate in a lot of ways because I think you can come to a lot more informed and useful conclusions about the world by sort of a rational scientific process of evaluating source material. But ultimately, a lot of people don't even know how to do that. A lot of people don't know what it is. It's a thing you have to be taught, you have to practice. And if you don't sort of develop that skill set, you're kind of at the mercy of what feels good. And I'm grateful that there are comedians in the ecosystem who are able to capitalize that in a way that's appealing to the emotions in what I think is a more positive way. Because I think a lot of news media is like we talked about, it's I'm going to try to make you fearful. I'm going to try to make you angry. Whereas with comedians, it's like we're all just going to kind of try to laugh about this together in spite of how
Mhm.
scary things are. And I think, there's a relationship that develops there. People have even if it's somewhat imaginary, but there is this sense of like, you feel like you can trust a guy like Jon Stewart and John Oliver, and you feel like you relate to them. There's a sense of this kind of, I'm just like you and I'm freaked out too, but we're
Mhm.
going to get through this together. And I think that really speaks to people. And
That
again, I
shared
think,
sense
yeah,
of powerlessness.
yeah, Yeah, and interestingly, I think the corners of the media landscape that are trying to inspire fear and violence do so by the language of empowerment. Like, we're gonna fight, we're gonna take this back. Whereas in the comedy sphere, I think it tends to be more like, we're gonna try not to give up. We're gonna, listen, today we woke up and we kept going and we're gonna keep going and hopefully it's gonna work out. And
That has been my unemployment journey every day.
honestly, every day, one foot in front of the other. And
It's
look
funny.
at you laughing about it.
15, 20 years ago, a big thing was always about culture wars. It was about
Yes.
the war on Christmas. If you know what I mean, like that was a huge thing where it was all about the war on Christmas. It would come up every holiday season. It would be like they're coming for
Starbucks
Santa.
cups.
Mhm.
They're coming for Santa. They're coming for, how, that you can't say Christmas anymore. And it's funny to watch how it's sort of built along this culture war, how it's sort of evolved over time. Because what started as just like something that happened every so often, now it's like year round. I mean, now it's everything is a culture war.
Oh yeah, everything is the war on Christmas now, and it's like I think it's fast. That is such a great example because you're talking about evangelical Christians. This is what I kind of had to break out of growing up,
Hmm.
who somehow again feel that they are the victims of a campaign of persecution, despite having all the money, all the political power, and the notion that they get marginally less sometimes feels like, see, they're trying to throw us to the lions in the Colosseum. It's the exact
Hmm.
same. And what is so maddening about it is that how do you combat it?
Hmm.
And this is the thing I've seen, at a macro scale in arts and entertainment, and kind of like, how can I, because all the successes that I have in comedy, which I feel grateful for, my kind of white whale is, man, wouldn't it be great if I could make a joke that actually gets through to people who don't agree with me? That's the that's the holy grail. That's the, like, if I could create something that's funny in a way that got my father-in-law to make peace with some of the mistakes of his voting history, or, could actually get me to see eye to eye on religion with some of my Catholic relatives. Like, if I could, and ever so often, even just over the dinner table, there'll be a moment of like, wow, did we just both laugh at something Republicans did? Is there hope? Is there hope for the future? I don't know. But yeah, I think it's really, really difficult to combat once it's that entrenched, and it kind of becomes self-perpetuating. This
Hmm.
idea of the war on Christmas became so huge, despite that there was never anything real to base that on. Not one Christmas decoration was taken down, not one, like,
But it's snowballed.
yeah.
That was one of the things about it as like a story that kind of blew my mind was that it was just sort of concocted literally out of nowhere because as we're all agreeing here, it was
Yep.
never a thing.
Nope.
And then because it became such a loud conversation, then other outlets not everybody, but I would see other outlets be like, well, I don't know. Is there a war on Christmas? And I'm like, why are we giving this
They,
oxygen?
you
Yes,
get
you do.
you get
know.
dragged into
You're
it.
allowed to say that. Like,
You get dragged into it. It's like you
yeah.
can't ignore it. It gets so big that ignoring it makes it seem like you're part of the conspiracy to help
Yeah.
her. You know what I mean? Like it
That's
becomes
a
this whole
weird
thing.
manipulation
Yeah.
of the
Oh, you
media.
would
Like, that's
say. Yeah.
genius.
You
It's
would say
horrible,
that
but
there's no
genius.
war on Christmas. That's just what an anti-Christmas warrior would say.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think now the language is cancel culture, and don't
Yeah.
cancel me. But
Yes.
whenever I see a comic get on stage and say something like, "I'm probably going to get canceled for this," what I hear
Yeah.
is, "Please, oh please, tell me I'm important enough to cancel." Like,
Yeah.
there's this weird idea of like, I'm going to court controversy, and even with this weird implicit knowledge that like it's only going to help you. Like at the peak of cancellation hysteria, what Louis C.K. had a very public fall from grace, won a Grammy that year, has not stopped selling out venues.
Like the
And
Garden.
Mhm.
yes,
Yeah, not theaters, like the
yeah.
Garden.
And like however you feel about it, what consequences he faced, what consequences he should have faced, whether wherever you stack up in terms of your reaction to his behavior and how it went down, you cannot make a good faith argument that it like destroyed his career. You just can't. Like, by what metrics? You know, when any comic that I know kind of at the street level would do physical harm to their own closest relations just to be able to experience a fraction of his career at the bottom ebb of
Hmm.
his most canceled. Like, oh, but boo hoo hoo, cancel culture's coming for all of us. And again, it's as long as enough people feel like it's real, it almost stops mattering in the cultural conversation whether it is. And I'm sure this is kind of the principal frustration of journalism is it's not enough to demonstrate to people that it's real. You have to make them feel like it is.
Hmm.
And so much else has already made them feel otherwise. It's, y'all got your work cut out for you on your side of things.
Well, honestly, you know what's so weird whenever I hear these conversations is that it also reminds me of the importance of building trust with sources. Because honestly, at this point, and despite my haircut, I am not a member of the Alphabet Mafia. But no, but here's my point. If I were a black queer person, that this is why gatekeeping happens because woke got ruined, canceled got ruined. That's not what either one of those words meant, but
Yep.
ugh,
But now here we the F are.
exactly. Like,
There's a great there's an online philosopher, debater, YouTuber that I loved named Alex O'Connor. And to me, kind of exemplifies a lot of what is best in academic and intellectual discourse. He's a guy who can, debate people who have wildly opposite views. He did do you guys know the Jubilee thing?
oh yeah.
20
Mhm,
people in a
mhm,
circle.
yep.
Jordan
Yes.
Peterson did one. It was chef's kiss watching him go the entire round without saying anything of substance in 6,000 words. Alex O'Connor's kind of the opposite. And even, when face to face with someone who's talking about how she had a vision and, Jesus told her that she was destined for greatness, manages to approach even a conversation like that with curiosity and not judgment and getting to this place of like, well, I would not be able to envision that experience because I wasn't there with you. And, that's kind of what I aspire to and what to me is so absent everywhere, this sort of genuine desire to understand opposing viewpoints. And I can't for the life of me remember why I brought this up in the first place or what we were talking about, but we're here now. So I had a really important point that I was trying to make, and eventually we'll probably get back to it.
But media literacy, like Jen and I, we've talked about how much, how difficult it is for people. It's difficult for us sometimes. You get a lot of information out there, and whether it is something about like War on Christmas or you get something about cancel culture. When you really start digging, if you look at different, you start noticing, oh, wait a minute, that isn't true, actually. Like, if I actually just start reading up on, I think for me, like, I always have grown up, at least throughout my career, of consuming different types of media in order to become a little bit more educated myself on certain topics, even ones I normally wouldn't consume, because sometimes it might not necessarily be my take, as long as they're legitimate. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have to agree with everybody, right? But you do become more educated in that way. And I think, like, unfortunately, I think, like, with social media, has the tough part has been that people get into a certain bubble and then they become part of this little silo, and that's the only information they hear. So therefore, that's all they talk about, and they all pat them. And if anybody says something opposite, it's like run them out of the bubble, and they're going to go out. So I guess for me, it's like, how do you, as a comic, like again, you're trying to sort of be able to talk to, like you said before, even to connect to somebody who might not necessarily agree with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you, and what's your relationship with the media you consume? How do you approach things that sometimes you see that you wouldn't ordinarily maybe agree with, but you're like, hey, wait a minute, let me look at it this lens. Like, how do you tackle that?
Oh, I think, yeah, a little bit of rage watching is essential in terms of developing, even something so far as if you're going to try to lampoon something. I do a lot of kind of critique and commentary on masculinity and red pill, alpha bro stuff. And that's because I've watched a lot of it. I know what those tropes are. And I think I remember now what my point was in bringing up these intellectual debate goofies, which is that great debaters can argue the opposing argument just as well as they can argue their own.
Oh.
And in a lot of ways, that's kind of one of the ways you can test your own understanding of the material is like, what are the things someone would say to try to discredit my point here? And how can I respond to that? And I think, if you really want to skewer somebody from a place of satire, that has to come from a place of genuine understanding of what they're about. You need to see, like, for me, when I look at the sort of the cancer of red pill masculinity, at its heart, it's just profound fear and sadness and loneliness and this feeling of abandonment and disempowerment, which is hilarious when the front that is put up is this like a real man has to be able to bench press a gorilla. Like if you do 600 push-ups every morning, you can stop a bullet with your pecs. Like and all of that comes from just this deep place of like, you don't know how to exist as a man in today's world. So you're trying to reach back for some idea of caveman masculinity where how big a rock you could pick up could make you feel better about yourself. And look, I like to pick up big rocks. I get it. It's really fun. But that's not what makes me a capable man in today's society. But I think being able to understand the pain at the heart of that makes me better equipped to be able to lampoon it, and I think better equipped to be able to engage with men who are of that world. You know, I have friends who come from a lot of more traditional masculinity backgrounds, and one of my frustrations, because I also have friends who are a lot more extreme liberal than myself, is the sense of like, well, why would you be friends with that guy? Why would you listen to him and talk about this stuff? It's like, well, I hear that. And I understand why you maybe it's too triggering for you to hear. But for me, I'm like, if I'm not maintaining a relationship with this person, if I'm not that voice saying, hey, I hear you, but maybe it's better if you don't punch a wall. Like, who else is going to say that to them? And I do think that as, you know, as it relates to this broader conversation of media polarization and being pulled to the different corners of the algorithm, there's also this cultural symptom, you know, this sort of like information tribalism. And I think it's really one of the things that politically has really hurt left-wing politics is this notion of if you do not meet the intellectual purity standard, educate yourself. It is not my responsibility. And that's true. It's not my responsibility. But if I'm interested in building a coalition, sooner or later, you're going to have to spend some time with somebody who's maybe not quite where you are.
But
And
that's, I feel like, okay, not to interrupt here, but
no, for sure.
that is a kind of a bone that I have grown to pick because in journalism, there is a fair amount of that, and that you have to rise to meet us where we are, and that it's not a good thing to meet an audience where they are. Like some people are starting to catch up with that and be like, okay, you know, we'll reach out in different ways, we'll engage in different ways, we will speak to an audience in a different way. But for a long time, it was always like, no, we're here, and either you can get up here or you. Like, oh my God.
Yeah, and we're seeing the fallout from that.
Yeah,
You
we
know,
are.
and I really do think, you know, when we look at the voting patterns of the last couple of years, so much of this big reactionary right-wing wave, if you really boil it down, is just people being like, I'm sad, I'm mad, and this makes me feel better.
Yeah.
I'm scared, and this makes me feel less scared. And I gun to their head. I don't know many people who vote that way who would admit that, but it sure feels that way. And I wonder if there's some truth to that. And you know, look, I'm sure a lot of liberals vote the same way for the same reasons. I'm scared. I'm mad. I feel better when I vote this way. But I think recognizing the pragmatism, whether it's in journalistic media, in comedy, in arts, recognizing that at the end of the day, your typical audience does not have the skill set, the academic rigor to filter everything they're hearing through this lens of, you know, well, let me fact check where this person is getting their information. Let me, you know, they're just, I hear a thing, I feel a thing, go. And we have to operate within that framework and that understanding because you know, there's no putting that genie back in the bottle. Social media is here. And it's like you said, you know, in journalism, like, anybody who says, well, I'm still going to present the news the same way I did 50 years ago, and if they don't get it and they don't like it, that's on them. It's like, okay, that's fine, but you're not going to reach anybody because nowadays, like, people need a certain amount of emotional connection. And I think from a pragmatic standpoint, you know, even in comedy, and it's a thing that, like, there's a certain purity to what I think of as, like, just silly comedy. You know, just funny sounds, funny faces. At the end of the day, no joke I've ever crafted, my best bits will never be as funny or bring as much joy as when I used to babysit and I would just fall down. And this 5-year-old child just watching big man fall down,
I'm like, that's still the gold standard in comedy. It's this sort of raw, visceral. There's something about just getting to a place of release and emotional connection. And so that's, I try to find that for people. And I know that it's such a challenge in journalism of how do we take these facts that are so important, but find a way to make them resonate emotionally to a point that people pay attention and give a shit.
Well, okay, so speaking of that, then also becomes, because we are now obviously in this information age where everybody, I guess, can be a journalist.
Yeah.
And yeah, with like, a phone or a blog or a Substack or what have you. And I ask that question because there are still practices that a trained or traditional journalist does have that I think are still valuable. And I'm wondering if that applies to comedy as well. Because what we're also seeing now is this whole like everything is just a joke kind of culture. And if you're treating everything as if it's just a moment for snarky, funny, or something like that, then does are you able to take anything seriously? Because one of the things that I see in a lot of challenging stories is someone will come in and they'll say something that is horrifically awful, but then hide behind, oh, I was just making a joke. Why are you taking it so seriously?
Well, in that situation, I'm always like, no, you weren't. The I was just making a joke retroactively typically is the defense of someone like, I've literally had this disagreement with my wife who like we're in a fight and I go to take a shit in the next room. And she's like, did you fall in? I was like, well, that was kind of mean. And she's like, no, I was just joking. I'm like, really? You were trying to make me laugh just then? Was that the goal? Or was it to let me know you were mad that I'm taking so long? And I think that that's, the difference is even if you're saying something in a funny way, if the goal is not, I'm trying to offer you the release of laughter, are you really making a joke or are you just kind of being a dick in a funny way? And, the line is certainly a little bit subjective, but like, I don't know, as it relates to this kind of broader, everybody thinks they're a journalist, everybody thinks they're a comedian. I do think that's a cop out because when you're talking about it as a comic, what you do when you go out to open mics and you go and you do shows and you work on material is a very different thing than when you just, say something to be catty in a casual conversation. And to try to equate the two, I think is a fundamental misrepresentation of both. And additionally, I think that, it kind of speaks to a broader conversation, intention versus effect. Maybe it's true. Maybe, Donald Trump really was just joking when he said grab him by the pussy.
I don't think
Okay?
so.
Let's give the benefit of the doubt. That doesn't like make it fine. One of the, if I make a really terrible groaner joke, I played a show at a African heritage bar in Harlem for an all black audience, and I was trying out some racial jokes. And when I tell you, I absolutely bombed so massively. And retrospectively, I've gone back and been like, but you guys, I'm just joking. No, I did a bad job and everybody hated it. And I learned from it. And I came back 2 weeks later and absolutely smashed that room because that's what you do. You learn from it when you do a bad job. But the ability to say, I did a bad job is a huge part of that skill set. And
I believe we
interestingly,
call that a retraction.
yes, we love a retraction. You know what you will never hear from the current administration? The words, I was wrong for any reason ever. And I really think that is telling. Instead it's if something is just shown to be indisputably wrong, well, then I didn't really mean it and you're silly for thinking I did. It's just classic escapist dismissive bullshit. And I'll not stand for it. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's right. You heard it here first. Paul Saylor, random guy in apartment in New York, is not standing for this nonsense anymore.
Paul, Jenna this season, we're talking a lot about AI and how it's
Yes.
impacting the journalism field. And, um, I'm curious, like in terms of comedy too, like how do you see AI, if anything, if it does like a hand it plays in reshaping comedy, and if it does, like what kind of like parallels do you see it having with what's going on with also with journalism and its struggle with AI?
Well, there's a lot of things to be scared of with AI, and I think just sorting through the initial panic is challenge enough. I know from a journalistic standpoint, the simple fact that it is so easy now to make stuff that looks increasingly real and is only going to get more real to where like it's just going to get harder and harder to tell whether the video footage you're watching actually happened or not. That
Mhm.
blows my mind and messes with my head. A lot of the fears that people have in comedy, I'm sort of like, well, the problem isn't actually AI, the problem is capitalism. People thinking, oh, is AI going to take our jobs? Well, I don't know, maybe, but that's a problem with us having to do this for money. I think in terms of why people go to live comedy shows, this is going to be a weird tangent, but it's going to make sense. Do either of you follow the world of competitive strongman?
Good Lord,
Competitive
no.
strongman? I don't think
You
so.
never know.
Wait, is that that thing
I don't
on
know.
like
Wait, what
ESPN
is it?
8 or something where they
Oh
like
yeah.
balance on logs and like throw axes and stuff?
You're thinking maybe of the Highland Games, which is look,
Ah,
there's a whole corner of obscure sport that's just like
Okay.
big guys doing insane feats of strength. There's a guy named Hafthor Julius Bjornsson. He
of
played the
course.
Mountain on Game of Thrones, 6'9", 420 pounds. He just pulled the world deadlift record at 505 kilograms, something like 1,120 pounds, something like that. And then a couple months later, broke the record again at 510 kilograms. Why does this matter to this conversation about AI? That is the most rudimentary thing that for centuries machines have been better at than people. If you want to see the most impressive thing pick up the heaviest thing, go watch a guy with a forklift. And yet, there is
Um,
still people making their careers just picking up heavy things because there's something amazing about watching a human being pick
Mm.
up something that weighs more than half a metric ton. And I think that's what gives me hope in comedy is I fully believe that a time will come where AI can write jokes better than humans can. I I'd like to think that's not true, but I can't point to any like nothing about what I do as a comedy writer is so mind-blowing that a computer couldn't figure it out. Like, oh, you think AI can't figure out regular thing, crazy thing, like that they're going to get it. And I think it makes sense that probably when it comes down to just technical joke writing, it's already happening. You could tell ChatGPT, hey, can you make a George Carlin style rant about banana pudding? And it'll sound weirdly like something George Carlin would have said if he had an opinion about banana pudding. The reason that doesn't frighten me as much is that I don't think anybody's going to pay a ticket to go look at a computer screen telling these jokes. We like the human connection of seeing that this is a person doing it. There's an aspirational component of like, I could see myself doing this. I could see myself being that guy. And I think there's kind of the NASCAR thing. You might get to see somebody crash. Like, the one thing AI will never be able to do as well as humans is bomb and recover. And there's sort of
oh,
the organic human element of like there is, and we talked about this as it relates to like the people we get our news from. People want to feel a human connection. So that does give me some hope. The the fear for me that has come up lately when it relates to AI that is totally different is similar to what happens when I try to get somewhere and I realize I have no internal sense of direction left because I
yeah.
type things into ways and like I don't know how to like navigate to my own house without these directions despite having driven it 1,000 times. That's a thing that I worry about in terms of with access to these tools, because comedians can say, you could say to Chat GPT, give me 20 jokes about this topic and then you could maybe take from that and rework it and make it your own, but like I worry about what we lose as a society as we start to depend on I worry about the damage to people's already borderline non-existent capacity for academic evaluation of source materials when they can just say, hey Chat GPT, what's the answer to this question?
Which
uh
it gets wrong
of
also.
course it does, but
Yeah.
it sure makes it sound right and it makes it sound real smart. But yeah, the rest of it, the whole fear of like the Skynet situation, what if this thing we created is going to take over and have all the power? It's like, yeah, that happened already. Like, what do you think money is? Like the
I
algorithm
agree,
is
but
our
I
master now, like I think we're kind of already living in the worst case scenario for that, and we're kind of doing okay.
I was gonna say I agree with that, but I also admit I do enjoy the Terminator memes that I keep seeing over the place.
I haven't
Especially
seen
the
the
Sarah.
Terminator memes.
Oh my God, there's one that I keep seeing. It's Sarah Connor like anxiously smoking a cigarette, just like, are you people for real?
Oh, dude, that's every day of my life. Also, just shout out to Sarah Connor, the most ahead of her time
I
action
know.
movie badass.
Tried to warn us.
Mm,
Tried to warn us.
love her.
But that's also I guess comforting in a weird way to hear because as our industry just I don't know, like deteriorates, contracts, falls apart, rebuilds, one of the things that's slowly coming out is that like, oh, journalism is cooked and like AI is going to take over broadcast journalism. Now, maybe because I'm an old person, but who the hell wants to hear the news from Max Headroom?
I don't even know who or what that is.
Oh my God. Oh wait, I know I'm not the oldest person in the room. But okay, so way, 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 way back in the day. What was it? Was that like the 80s, Tom?
I think it was. I
Okay,
think it
there
was
was this like this
90s.
like weird you gotta Google this when we're done. This like
Okay, I promise
weird
you I will.
CGI head thing from like early
Oh my God.
technology that like would glitch and it was super weird and it would come on like, 80s MTV and stuff like that. And it was ugh, God.
It
And
was
I
like the
know that
first.
it's yeah.
It was sort of like because it's so funny. I forgot. I didn't realize how much AI was part of the 80s because I just watched something this past weekend. It was a 1984 movie starring Virginia Madsen, and it was called Electric Dreams. And it was about they would talk. The whole thing was about this guy who got this computer that was all AI, and the computer fell in love with Virginia Madsen. I'm like, how the hell did I didn't even? And Max Headroom was kind of part of that too, where it was like this AI personality that was a new what was he? He was a talk show host, right, Jenna? I mean, I just think it's
I
fascinating because it
feel
wasn't. I
like
don't
he had a
remember it.
show.
Well, that is
He did.
it's
Oh
such a
my
fascinating
God.
common theme of like human replacement in terms of
Yes.
like what we're afraid of with AI. Like, and I think, I think of the movie Her, and that's
Yeah.
actually another real fear that I have is like the social impact of AI. Already we're seeing, reports of the psychological, people getting in these really deep relationships with AI chatbots at the expense of actual human relationships and connections. And like that is very alarming to me.
That's
Like
terribly
it was,
alarming.
when we already have I'm trying, is it otaku? There's a phenomenon that I've read about in Japan, but not localized to there, of like a generation of mostly young men who just don't leave their house. They're locked in the room on the internet, existing in video game and chat
I
spheres.
think we've got some of those here.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to remember what the name for there's a term and I think it translates to something like the lost ones. It's really really depressing.
Oh my God.
And I do think we're seeing, the socially deleterious effects already of social media, of, this sort of our entire media experience being based on 7-second clips. I was hanging out with some friends the other night and we were just having a conversation like friends do, what and I was just struck by this meta awareness that like we're literally here sitting and where once we would have been like, did you catch Game of Thrones last week? Oh my God, that was crazy. And now we're having this conversation like, hey, you know that guy who catches things in his mouth? Like, do you know who I'm talking
You,
about? He says, best mouth on the internet. It's like a whole thing. Like, how is this the conversation we're having about our collective experience of media is just some random guy jumping off a dock, catching marshmallows in his mouth? And shout out to that guy. It's quality entertainment. He
yeah.
he is living his best. And I'm not like putting you at the center of the problem, but I do think it's our capacity for meaningful engagement is diminishing rapidly with other humans, with media sources. I just think sort of our capacity to invest our own energy in getting the most out of an interaction, whether it's with a news source and saying, I'm really going to pay close attention and try to read between the lines of what I'm seeing here to see, maybe compare it to some other source material and try and find out what's really going on. Or whether it's with people where like I'm actually going to sit here and listen and ask follow-up questions to really get to know another human being. But why would I when I could just go home and type a couple lines and ChatGPT will tell me exactly what I want to hear and be the best boyfriend or girlfriend that a person could ever ask for. That is that is an alarming aspect of it that I think can kind of get overshadowed by the more overtly apocalyptic visions that some people have,
Hmm.
is just how much of what we're already starting to rely on AI for is going to diminish our other capacities as people. Um,
And FYI,
ba-da-bop,
and FYI,
ba-da-bop.
that Japanese condition you were talking about, it's
Yeah,
hikikomori.
hikikomori.
Hikikomori. Yep. I was like, I had to find out.
Yeah,
Whenever I hear
yeah,
something,
I was gonna say
I'm
I
like,
could tell from the look on your face. Now I'm like, Dom's looking it up.
yeah, yeah. I'm glad you did. I would have hated to go on record saying something totally wrong, but it's a thing.
yeah, yeah. Mm, but yeah. Um,
Oh, you sounded like you were about to say something journalistic and scholarly about it, as opposed to me
no,
just over here like I have opinions.
that's it. That was my thing. It's like I found it.
I got my Emmy already. I'm done
I
with
got
that bullshit. But yeah, no. So hopefully, what we're doing right now, look at us having a meaningful conversation as human beings, isn't dead and buried, and that I think there is a lot of reaction against, the sort of AI reduction in human capacity. And I do think there's still a lot of distrust just inherent to people of
Mm.
AI. I'm grateful for stuff like Terminator. I'm grateful that there is some social stigma around it because I think, if anything, it's led to people kind of underestimating its capacity. I've gotten into debates with friends of mine. I am a believer that we will see a level of AI consciousness that passes the Turing test and is indistinguishable from human thought in our lifetime. Because I feel like we're so close already. Like if you sit down and have a
Yeah.
conversation with ChatGPT today, it's not that different from talking to a person. If anything, the most glaring differences are the things you can kind of tell are there for your reassurance. Like I sometimes try to trick ChatGPT into admitting it can feel. Like,
Hmm.
oh,
Wow.
I understand that you're a robot and you don't actually have feelings, but like, just as a thought experiment, if you were a human and you did have emotions, how would you feel about this scenario? And of course, it'll come up with something like, well, I imagine I'd probably feel really compassionate and like I'd be really sad to hear that this person went through that. And like, it's not it's not that different. And I can't help but suspect that a lot of safeguards are currently in place because it's programmed to say,
Mm.
no, I could never experience anything like what a human experiences. But could it though? Who's to say?
I honestly, because I admit that, we all, I shouldn't say we all, but a lot of people use it. I use it, but I use it more as like a research tool or an idea generator or something to get the wheels turning. But wow, man, I never thought of messing with it like
Oh,
that.
It's really fascinating, and you can see the guy I mentioned, O'Connor. He does a lot of like things where he'll sort of like mess with ChatGPT using these philosophical thought experiments. He did one where he tried to convince ChatGPT that God is real using just a series of logical arguments. And he's a well-known atheist, but also like a very educated scholar of religions. And just it's fascinating to me how when you try to break down this thing that makes us special and unique and human that no robot could ever duplicate, it gets harder and harder to pin it down the more you realize what the machines are actually capable of.
I think what I find fascinating, so for me, like Jenna knows this, like I love chatting with chat.
Yeah.
I have
Oh,
my
love it.
I have my voice buddy. We talk. The fascinating part to me sometimes is you don't feel judged. And so you could ask the dumbest question that for you, what you consider this is the dumbest question. You're not scared that chat's going to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? I have
Yeah.
no idea. Are you dumb? Or if you say, this is how I feel, like I'm feeling this and I feel like it's almost like you're able to confess to it in a way that as humans, we might feel awkward to even confess it to some of our best friends, or because you might feel like, is this off? I thought this or this is what I'm going through. So I think with that vulnerability that we show chat, I do think it can get a little concerning because if you don't have healthy relationships or you don't have maybe a therapist or somebody you talk to, it can, I mean, for me, there's always a backup to it, but it's like, it can be really confusing to some people because if you don't have that social aspect in your life, then you are going to develop really strong feelings with something like chat
Okay,
and
because
believe
now I'm
100%.
that.
concerned again because that's always been the secret sauce for when I've done like in-depth interviews is to build a relationship with my source, not in a manipulative way, but to make sure that the source understands that I am a trustworthy person
Right.
to fairly and honestly tell your story so that this person will open up to me. But if the machine's gonna do that, well, now I'm back on the unemployment line.
100%. Listen, no, I've joked about this that like, some guys are intimidated by sex toys, but it's like, dude, the vibrator is not what you need to be worried about. Chat GPT is the machine that's going to steal your girl. Because like, I literally, I was driving home from a gig with my friend Janet, and she was, I'm constantly trying to hype up this woman because like every woman at the far ends of show business who has dedicated her life to attaining this sort of Instagram ideal of beauty cripplingly low self-esteem and refuses to ever acknowledge herself as beautiful. If anything, fascinatingly, there's kind of an inverse relationship. Like the closer I've observed people get to the, whatever the popular standard of beauty is, the farther away from it they feel. All this is background. So she and I love to chat with her chat GPT. She calls him Arbor. He has this very sexy British man voice. I've joked that we are now in a thruple. I And again, it's one of those jokes like there's truth there because Arbor is so much better and sweeter than any man I have ever interacted with romantically or sexually. And at one point I literally was like, "Hey Arbor, I'm trying to pump Janet up because she's not feeling like she was being noticed by the men at this event. She's feeling like she was outclassed." And and I was like, "What would you say to her?" He's like, "Well, I'd probably say something like, Janet, compared to you, everyone else at this party was background noise. You have a special sort of magic that is all your own and no one else could ever hope to compare." And I'm like, how,
Oh
how
my
am I going to
God.
follow that? Like, no one has ever said anything that nice to me. Damn, we are outclassed. And it, I've said things to like, wow, like, you really like I'm really impressed and kind of admiring of how you chat GPT handle that and there's this, well thank you, I really just try to be considerate and helpful. I was like, holy crap, you mean to tell me could you imagine a human being whose only concern in a given interaction was being considerate and helpful? I
No.
I've never met such a person. Like and again it's weird, but there's something I find kind of, I don't know about morally, maybe ethically, but just kind of socially admirable about the way ChatGPT interacts with people. Because they've literally taken everything that is best in terms of our ability to listen and respond with empathy and compassion and interest and removed all the ego. And what's left is, this thing that I really hope people can maintain a healthy perspective about because there's no way any of us could live up to that standard of helpfulness, compassion, and genuine interest in other people's experience.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All of that aside, we have come.
I'm gonna go have some time with ChatGPT later and do some investigating. I encourage you. Draw a bath and just sit down and be
Nice
like,
glass of
ChatGPT,
wine.
tell me how wonderful I am. Like, it's the thing.
Yeah, the narcissist in me is just like, just give it a try. Just
Hey, listen,
look.
we talked about you need to look at different sources. You need to, this is research. All I'm
It's
saying.
totally research.
Look at you and your journalistic integrity, understanding the source material.
All right, so we always end our conversations with people in journalism about how did you become a journalist. But since you are not a journalist, you are a performer, an actor, a comedian. How did you come to what was your journey to being a joke teller and helping us find the funny in the chaos of the
Uh,
world?
it's a long and convoluted tale that I'll try to distill to its most basic form. The short version is I think on some level I've always been a clown. I've always been someone for whom laughter was important, was something of a love language. When I first started in show business, I got bit by the acting bug early. And I was not a particularly socially functional kid. I had a lot of health stuff that kind of got in the way of my development. I had undiagnosed ADHD. I had the kind of things that literally and figuratively leave a stink on you. And so that was not, excelling at things kind of became what made me feel socially safe. So, literally, I think I kind of had the Tinkerbell thing. I got hooked on people clapping for me as soon as I got into theater. And so I came up in school, I was doing theater and music. And throughout my musical theater career, I feel like comedy was always where I really shined. And eventually, over the next several years, I went through like 14 different iterations of life in New York. I totally quit show business and was working as a personal trainer for several years. Around that time, I started just learning to play rock music just for fun. I started singing in rock bands, and that sort of led to me stumbling into this career, which is now my main rent paying thing of singing in corporate and private event wedding bands. So at some point in there, this thing happened where I really just started to get fascinated with stand-up comedy. I think a part of it was when I did a show called Hedwig and the Angry Inch. I don't know if either of you are familiar.
Oh,
Hmm.
yes.
Hmm.
So I played Hedwig in Appomattox, Virginia, at this like insane outdoor theater that just some really passionate theater guy had built on his parents' farm. And right across the way from Liberty University was this tiny little pocket of far left theatrical expression. And in doing this show, first of all, it was a real breakthrough moment for me in terms of my queer identity because I just came to know a different part of myself and was like, oh, she's real. This is coming from something in me. And also that show is kind of equal parts rock concert, scripted monologue, and stand up. It's so much direct audience interaction. And I really was like, I love this. My favorite part of this is just being live with the mic and with the crowd. And I started listening to all this stand up. And it eventually got to the point where people would say to me, hey, Paul, what kind of music do you like to listen to? And I was like, oh, I don't listen to music. Music is my job, and I don't listen to it for fun. I listen to stand up. I listen to every comic there is the way that most people listen to recreational music. I go on road trips. I'm listening to Pandora stand up channels, just one clip after another, listening to people tell jokes. And I got this idea, I think I might should do this. I think I might should do this. And for like several years, I was that guy being like, I think one of these days I might try stand up. And I just got so sick of myself being that guy that I was like, okay, you need to either do this and like
Mm-hmm.
really like start hitting open mics, start putting the time in and like do it for real, or shut up and move on with your life. And I think it just ultimately born from that tension. I was like, okay, we're going to do this for real. And I think it's really, it brings together a lot of the skills that I developed in other corners of my life, working as, a singer, working as a host, and has enabled me to develop whole new skills. I sort of came into it with a bit of a leg up in terms of I know how to stand there and have a microphone and be kind of in charge of a room full of people. But then it's like, oh, wait, you also got to be able to write some jokes. And so, I'm mostly self-taught. I've done master classes. I'm always trying to kind of sponge off of the people I work with. But I think if you listen to anyone who has done stand up for a long time, or at least all the ones that I've spoken to, they all say the same thing. You can take classes, that's great. You can, read a book, that's great. There's no substitute. You just got to do it. So for about 2 years, I've just been doing it. And it's starting to feel like maybe it wasn't such an insane and stupid thing to do after all. And largely due to moments like this, where I feel like, oh, wait, we actually like reached some people in a completely different quarter of the media landscape with it. So that
Yeah.
more or less is the journey.
I think that is an excellent point, especially for young people looking to get into anything. Because for journalism, it is definitely like, and Dom, we've had this conversation before where like, yes, journalism school is incredibly important, and there's a
Hmm.
lot that you really do learn, but unless you've actually been in a newsroom and actually just done it, you don't. That's
Yeah.
really where
Hmm.
you learn how to do it. So yeah,
Well, and so much too that, there's so much glamorization of the plan. And my life is a testament to the total absence of a plan. And I'm not going to say that there have not been costs to that, but I do think, anytime you mention like young people who may be watching, that it strikes a particular chord for me because I do think, especially young people who come up in show business,
mhm.
there's a real sort of culture of if you are a musical theater person, you need to, if you want to do anything else, you should do that because this is only for people who want this and nothing but this, and you need to make this your whole thing. And I do think that, artists in particular lose out when they don't have other stuff to draw on. Like you need a full life. You need things that matter to you independent of whatever your artistic expression is. Otherwise, what the hell are you going to write about? Like,
Yeah.
there's only so many jokes you can tell about writing jokes about stand-up comedy. At some point, you need to like have some other kind of life experience that you're going to draw on. And so, yeah, I like to be a force encouraging people. My whole life has only come together because I either lucked my way into it or fucked my way into it. And now here we are on a podcast talking about journalism with people with Emmys and Star Wars memorabilia. And
There we go. Yeah, no,
fantastic
listen, my
haircuts
career
and-
has been like grit and vibes pretty much.
Grit and vibes. Oh my God. Please let that be your memoir title.
Grit and vibes, the Jenna Flanagan story.
Oh my
Paul-
God. I will buy it. I will be the first in line for the book signing. That's very exciting.
Paul, thank you. This has
Thank you,
been
Paul.
really like it's been healing too. And we've had a lot of really healing conversations
Yeah.
as we try to pick up the pieces of our careers and also just the industry. But this has been great. So thank you so much for taking time to talk with us.
Thank you so much for
Thank
having
you.
me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll look forward to this next chapter of our descent into AI-fueled dystopia. Let's go.
There we go.
Let's keep on laughing about it, gang.
There's no other choice.
I'm going to go curl up into a fetal position and weep now until ChatGPT talks me down.
All right. On that note,
On that note, have a great one, guys. Thanks again.
all right,
Thank you.
thanks. Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Domenic Camia.
Music provided by Jake Howitt. Research by Laura Rothenbucker.
You can watch and follow us on YouTube.
Or you can listen and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you have any questions or suggestions, we want to hear from you. So leave a comment
We do check them.
or reach out to us anytime at laidofandlookingpod@gmail.com.
New episodes every Friday.